Welcome to the Virtuosity podcast, and we are doing our John Coltrane audio biography. I'm here with my co-host, Timo Shanko.
Hello.
Hello, Timo. And we did part one, and so we'll get into part two in just a second. But I just want to say a few things first. This is part of a whole audio biography on John Coltrane, where we dig in and we go through his entire career, really from a musical point of view. And as we mentioned in part one, there's a great documentary out called Chasing the Train, and we highly recommend anybody interested in Coltrane or starting to learn about him, check out that documentary because it gives you a great overview of his life. But it's an hour and 40 minutes long, and so it's impossible for them to get deep into the music. So that's why we're doing our series. And
another great resource, Ethan, is Lewis Porter's biography book. That was a really good biography that Lewis Porter wrote.
And what's the name of that one?
You're putting me on the spot. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me.
All right. Well, we'll
it's Lewis Porter's famous biography of Train. That was the best one.
All right.
of his biographies.
So
sure.
if you Google Lewis Porter and John Coltrane, you'll get that easily. Okay, great.
Yeah, I think he's considered the premier biographer of Train, and he does a good job in that book.
Great. So the way this series works is that we're going to make part one and part 5 available for free to everybody, so they can get an idea of what we're doing here. But the other parts are all going to be just exclusive content for our Patreon customers and subscribers, I guess I should say. And that's part of the exclusive content that you can only get at our Patreon, and that's patreon.com/virtuosity. And you can go there, and there's a subscription for people who are just fans of the music and want to hear the audio biographies. And then there's also other tiers where we get into Timo's exclusive transcriptions that he's done of solos that will be provided based on the cuts that we're playing on the show. And not only that, but you get more. We're going to be doing a series of these audio biographies on many artists, mostly focused on jazz because that's Timo's expertise and where he has a lot of the work he's done on the transcriptions. But also, there's also classical content. I'll let you quickly explain the classical content, Timo.
Oh, okay. The classical content would be like, I put the chord changes on the music, so it would be like Chopin nocturnes with the harmonizations. Because when you read through Chopin, the piano music's so difficult to read, and you enter into the world of classical piano, what you do with your fingers, and it's kind of this ancient high art form of piano mechanics, and I want to bypass that because everybody talks about that. I want to bypass that and talk about the actual chord changes, the actual harmony that's being played, how you voice the chords, because that is applicable to your own composing, your own knowledge of harmony, your own arranging and orchestrations, and your own jazz writing or jazz improv playing. It's like that. This is the keys to the kingdom, in my opinion. So I kind of developed a way of writing harmony on the classical scores and piano literature and piano reductions of scores to kind of get right to the meat of the matter. And I'd like to share that with people.
Great. Very cool. And so some of the examples of other people will be doing these audio biographies would be Miles Davis. Give me a few more names of people you're...
Ornette Coleman, Thelonious Monk, Art Tatum. We could even do things like great songwriter revolutionaries like Bob Marley or something like, people, John Lennon, I don't know, people along that maybe cross genres that way.
Right.
But that more focused on jazz for my own taste personally.
Yeah,
and the transcriptions for sure.
Right. I know you've done transcriptions of all sorts of
and
different...
composers. We could do Bartok, Chopin. I don't know.
Yeah.
We could focus in on my favorite composers too.
Right. But in terms of the transcriptions, most of those are like solos and
Yeah.
things within the tunes, because there's a lot of access to get the sheet music for a lot of this music. But what's unique about your transcriptions is the solo transcriptions that are also in different keys, so that
Yeah,
guitars.
and my transcriptions are well, I mean, if I could brag a little bit, they're accurate. Whereas if you buy other people's transcriptions, they're sloppy, inaccurate, in B flat or E flat. So if you play piano or guitar, you're now in a wrong key. It becomes like this impenetrable tangle of wrongness to kind of grapple with, and all the while, what we're trying to do is cut to the chase, cut right, and get to the heart of the music, and not all this nonsense that gets kind of surrounded, and makes it impenetrable. You know, for a lot of people, they want to use. They want to use pictographs of the fretboard instead of reading music, or saxophone players all want to play in B flat, read in B flat. I want everything in concert key, and I can, some of the stuff is transposed to all the relevant keys: B flat, E flat, bass clef, etc. But for me, it's about unifying all the music into concert key, where everything's written accurate. The double bar lines are always at the end of the staff, so you can really see the sections, so you can practice sections at a time, so you can memorize the music well. And it kind of gets rid of all the things that are wrong about the real book, the wrong book. Just bypass all that and get right to the music.
Great. Okay, that's again, check out the Patreon page if you're interested in any of that material. And if you want the full audio biographies that we're going to be doing on these great artists. So let's, I guess one last thing. You can always find us on Spotify. You also on YouTube, you'll find our playlists and video when there's good video of the performances. We put up the videos there as well. So that's really
Nice.
fun. To be able to see how these guys do this instead of just always listening. So that's an advantage we get over there at YouTube.
Yeah.
But let's get into part two. We last left John Coltrane kind of down and out.
Yeah.
He's really descended into a terrible heroin addiction, and Miles has fired him. What was that, for the second time?
Well, I mean, I think it was the first time Miles fired him, but it was the third time he got fired from one of his mentor's bands. He got fired from Dizzy's band with a needle hanging out of his arm. He got fired from Johnny Hodges' band, being late and sloppy. And now he gets fired from Miles's band for all of the above.
Right.
And so here's this earnest, he's a really nice guy, and he's a really hard worker. He really loves music and practicing, and he's a sweetheart of a man. And he's getting the gig with who he wants to get the gig with. His life's going to open up in front of him, but he just can't get the monkey off his back, the addiction thing. And it comes to a head with him getting fired by Miles and beat up. Miles actually punched him out at the gig. Thelonious Monk had to come to his rescue, as sort of the legendary story. This is kind of shocking stuff, And I think at this point he was now determined to turn this around. His playing on the recordings is already really good. He's a really excellent bird disciple. His 16th note on double up bebop playing is already like par excellence. He's one of a handful of guys playing it on that level. He's already got that Coltrane beautiful conception of the higher tone on the tenor. And so he's already on his way to being his own man and being the great musician. But he just needs to kick the habit. And he goes to Philly.
So he was in New York when he was fired by Miles. He goes basically back to his hometown in Philadelphia.
Right, to clean up, yeah. And he goes through the horror crucible of kicking the habit, which is going to be 2 full weeks of intense vomiting and diarrhea and cramps everywhere in your body, sweats and chills, and it's horrible. And you have to face your demons from all accounts. Like in the movie, they talk about him facing it alone upstairs in the apartment, and people just kind of bringing him things every once in a while, a little something to eat, or mostly just water to keep it going. And you have to face the horrors, and all the while, you got the devil right on your shoulder. He's telling you, "Hey, man, all you got to do is take a little more of this the same old shit, and all this pain will go away." It really is like a Faustian bargain, He's going to be right there telling you every second, all you got to do is take some more shit, and you'll be fine. It's terrible.
Well,
but he was determined to get through it, and he did get through it. And I think he talks about what helped him get through it was his faith in God, and he had a epiphanous moment with the Creator, so to speak, I think, at that time, and that's when he composed the poem of gratitude to God and service to the goodness of God. And he composed the poem that would later be in the Love Supreme album jacket, that he would then do in plain chant style on Psalm. The fourth part of Love Supreme is plain chant recitation of the poem on C minor.
wow.
And that comes from this experience. And if you read the poem, it's, all praise to God, gratitude to God. It's just, I will work for you tirelessly if you get me through this. And it's a deal. He's making a bargain, not with the devil. He's making a bargain with God.
Right.
And he really holds it up, and he becomes this great symbol to the world, a sort of beacon of light, point of light to the world that is called John Coltrane. And, not just through the hard working, but it's the recovery, and the music has this spiritual dimension that goes on fire after this. And thank God it happened.
Now, what year was Love Supreme released? I mean, how many years earlier is this?
He recorded it like around Christmas time, 1964.
So this is 7 years earlier when he wrote that poem.
Yeah, 1957. Yeah.
So he's starting on that
April.
that kind of spiritual path, or this awakening, and it's going to kind of culminate, at least in relationship with this poem and that kind of concept.
Well, the funny thing about jazz, in particular saxophone practicing kind of puts you in touch with this more like ancient woodwind. The gods of India seem to be invoked through in very earnest woodwind practice. Does that make any sense?
Well, I think one thing we hadn't talked about yet, I think, is that I think you and I talked about this a while back when I asked you, what it is. Obviously, you had these musicians that you admired and were learning about and studying. From Bird to Coltrane and everything. In terms of, you started as a bass player and then picked up the sax at a certain point, because I think, as you said, you wanted to do what they were doing, but also,
yeah, I was so influenced by them. I was moved by their music. Yeah, sure.
But also going from a stringed instrument to an instrument that's controlled by breathing, and has a vocal quality to it because of that. It really is it's kind of halfway between a pure musical instrument where you tap on things to create sound and where you're actually using your physical breath, your life force, to make music with this instrument. And
there's the singing on it, and then there's the breathing. It ends up being a kind of meditation. And if you do 4 or 6 hours a day of like earnest woodwind practice, it seems to kind of take over a meditative state. I mean, I know that a lot of guys are geeky math guys, and they kind of make the whole thing kind of stuck in the mud of math instead of it being more spiritually expansive. But for me and numerous others, you can readily see and hear the spiritual component to it. And I often feel connectivity to Bismillah Khan from India, to invocate the gods of the ancient Hindu gods. It almost seems like you're in touch with ancient Tibet or levitating stones and some ancient technology that built the pyramids. You almost feel like you're going there with it. It's like that expansive.
Wow. Wow. So I guess as we go along, you'll point out the milestones of when he started listening to music from India and other places. I don't know if he already was at this point, or if that's something that started to develop in the upcoming years. But I mean, he was also, I guess, seeking out and listening to other music now, other than just Charlie Parker and bebop and those kind of things.
Well, he tips his hat to Sidney Bechet, the great, pioneer of the soprano sax. And it's readily apparent in like Art Blakey's drumming that he's listening to African music, and he's listening to Caribbean music that's more readily connected to its African roots than American music is. American music shuffles more and does kind of its own thing with rhythmically, as does Jamaican music. But the other Caribbean nations, the population that had been slaves was much closer to their African roots. In Cuba, that's African music, In Haiti, that's African music.
Yeah.
And those guys are checking all that out because they want to get in touch with their African roots for sure. They're black nationalists too. They're not, and they're also very intelligent. So it's not like they're not aware of these basic cultural things.
Right. So let's get onto the music, and so it's kind of set us up where he's kind of recovered from the habit. He's kicked the habit. He's made his deal with God to service love and beauty and creativity. And
the amazing thing is that he does his first prestige session under his own name. The other albums that are released as Coltrane albums that were recorded before this were not his sessions. They just released him as his sessions because he became more famous than the guys who were the leaders of the session. But this session on the album called Coltrane, Prestige 7105, with a picture of him kind of like on a park bench or something, kind of staring at you with his tenor laid out in front of him, that's his first actual solo album. Wow. And it happens a month after he's clean. So it's like very appropriate, and it seems like God is already fulfilling his end of the bargain. Like, okay, you made a deal with me. Here's your first solo album. Do it.
Huh. And so he returns to New York for these sessions.
Yeah, he's back in New York. But it's just a month later.
Right. Okay.
So on the record, there's a Cal Massey tune. It was his old Philly composer buddy, trumpet player. And then he does While My Lady Sleeps. His treatment of it is so original because he's already doing these original arrangement revamps on standards. So you don't even really recognize the standard. Who knows what show that's from? While My Lady Sleeps? That's not in the canon of like the American Songbook. Nobody talks about While My Lady Sleeps. And he does this kind of cool vamp in the beginning that's already makes it a train tune. You like the way he's going to make My Favorite Things his own thing. That doesn't sound like the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. And on this album, he's going to do Straight Street, which is an original of his. And that's the kind of tune where there's complicated chords, complicated fast-moving chords. Lots of 2/5s moving around and kind of in an original fashion, which he'll become famous for with Giant Steps and stuff in a couple of years. And then his penchant for picking standards that people don't play much that are going to become, because he plays them so great, they become standards because Train played them. Time Was, and the great ballad Violets for Your Furs. Nobody else, I don't have a recording of anybody else playing that until Train played it, and then people started playing it because Train played it so good.
Cool. All right. So let's listen to While My Lady Sleeps, and it's Coltrane's debut album as a leader.